Excellent. Thank you so much, Stephen. Appreciate it. Thanks to all the folks at Virtuous. I am excited to be here. Feel free in the chat. Make sure you let us know who you are and where you're calling in from. I always love that part as well. When I'm attending the conference, I love it when people are active in the chat. And I'll try and keep an eye on that as we go. I'm going to share my screen. If you'll bear with me for one moment. We got folks from Denmark here. Hello, Christina. Excellent. Okay, so as you heard, my name is Nic Prenger. I'm talking about the Goldilocks zone. Somebody complimented the headline. I don't know if you guys know, but the secret to being a good speaker at all, it has nothing to do with your speaking abilities, and it's everything to do with the name of your session. Every single thing to do with that. That's the only thing that matters, is if you have a good, catchy headline, folks will show up. So we're proud of that name. Okay, we're going to start with something interactive today. I'm going to start with some psychology experiments. Social Security number, and it occurs to me now as I look through the chat and see we have an international audience. This may not apply to all of you, but in the US we have a Social Security number. What I want everybody to do is write down the last 2 digits of your Social Security. Don't share. Do not share your Social Security number with folks. Write down the last 2 digits, okay, on a piece of scratch pad, or if you have chat open somewhere, or you can text it to yourself. But I want you to write it down, the last 2 numbers. Okay. All right, that's enough time. It's only 2 numbers. So my last 2 are 22. Now, I want you to guess the price of this bottle of wine. Okay? Guess the price of this bottle of wine. You got about 10 more seconds. Don't put it in the chat yet. Hold on. Don't put it in the chat yet. Don't ruin our beautiful experiment. Okay. Now, I only want some of you to put it in the chat. If the last 2 digits of the Social Security number were 20 or less, right? So my last 2 numbers are 22, so that wouldn't be me. If they're 20 or less, now in the chat, let us know what you think that bottle of wine costs. We'll see if this works. We'll see if we have a large enough sample size. Okay, excellent. Thank you. Okay, 18, 20. Excellent. Okay, now we're going to wrap it up. And we're going to go the other way. If your last 2 digits were more than 80, now's your chance. Okay. Only if your last 2 were more than 80, let us know what you think that bottle of wine costs. 100, 45, 92, 200. Excellent. I think it works. Somebody's going to have to check me on here if they have time to do all the math. What psychologists found when they ran this experiment, I'll share it with you. Those 2 questions back to back. Folks, if their Social Security was less than 20, then they just wrote down a number less than 20, the average guess for the bottle of wine was $30. If their Social Security numbers were larger than 80, right, if the number they wrote down was 80 or higher, they ended up guessing $85. Okay, so that's experiment number 1. I think it worked here. We're going to have to see. I'll have to go back and go through the transcript to see if it worked on the chat. All right, second famous psychology experiment that is relevant to what we're talking about today. This was Gandhi. The question posed to folks was Gandhi older than 9 when he died? Okay. Psychologists asked that question to a whole bunch of people. The average response was, and then they asked how old was he when he died? So was he older than 9? How old was he? The average answer was 50. You can see where this is going to go. The researchers then said, okay, was Gandhi younger than 140? Whole different set of people. Was Gandhi younger than 140? Of course he was younger than 140. The point was just to get the number in their head, right? It didn't even have to be reasonable, which is another thing they found. The average age was 67, right? Final experiment. This is a fun one. They did this on college campuses. So this is back in, I think it was 72 or 75 researchers did this. They asked thousands of college kids. They said, here's a camp. Would you volunteer at this camp for 2 hours per week for the next 2 years? 2 hours every single week for the next 2 years. You can imagine the answer. They had 0%, which actually surprised me that nobody even said, yes, I'll do this. They had 0% said that they would volunteer at this camp for the next 2 years. Okay. Then they asked a second question. Okay, after asking, would you do it for 2 years? Everybody said no. They said, well, would you volunteer at this camp just once? And what happened was the people that said no, it was only 50%. Half of them said, yeah, okay, I'd do it just once. Okay, so think about that difference in reaction. Went from nobody would volunteer to, yeah, half of them would volunteer. When the researchers took away the first question, okay, when they did not ask if they volunteer for an entire year or for 2 years, they just came right out of the gate with that question. Would you volunteer at this camp for 2 hours just once? They previously just got 50% of the people to say yes. And what they found was that number went down to 17%. So if they came out of the gate and asked people, would you volunteer at this camp just one time for 2 hours? Only 17% said yes. When they asked people first, would you volunteer for 2 years, and let them say no, and then did it as a follow-up question, they got half of the people. Why do we go through this psychology research? Because here's why. How we present things matters. Okay? And when we're in fundraising, we're always presenting things. We're inviting people to give, we're presenting our mission, we're presenting our cause for support. And the way in which we present that to potential donors, to existing donors, to our staff, to our board, it matters quite a bit. So that's what we're going to talk about today. I'm the founder and CEO of Prenger Solutions Group. We have a couple software things live in the market that you guys can look up called Ask Genius and Automate Genius. What we're talking about today, I'm going to dig right in. It's based on 4 years of research. My team and I have studied this topic exhaustively of how do you present ask amounts to donors. So at PSG, we do fundraising consulting. We run large multi-million-dollar appeals, high-end appeals for large clients, right? They pay us a lot of money to be really smart and help them raise more money. So we're always doing research to find out what is the smallest, what's the littlest edge that we can get, and we're going to take it. So a lot of our clients are large Catholic dioceses. So we did a huge research project, and we went out to hundreds of them. We said, give us your pledge cards. Show us what you're sending out to donors and potential donors, because we want to study how you're presenting it, whether it works or not, what the strategy is behind it. And a lot of what we're presenting today comes from this landmark research project that we spent years and years on. What we learned, okay? First, let's just talk about the pledge cards. There are two kinds of pledge cards that nonprofits are using. When I say pledge card, I'm saying when you send out a mailing and invite somebody to give through the mail, and you have a remittance envelope and a little card that they can fill out to give. Of course, you're going to invite them to give online, which is something else we're going to talk about. The card itself, there's two kinds. Number one, there's an open-ended pledge card, okay? And it looks like this. Open-ended meaning you're asking them to support your organization, and then you're letting them fill in the blank, okay? Please go ahead and write in whatever you want. They're going to write in an amount, and they're going to send it back in. This version of a pledge card, then we have a second version, pledge card with ask amounts, okay? This is, you're sending them a pledge card. You're not inviting them to write in a number. You're encouraging them to check a box. You've given them the numbers already. In this case, a recurring gift of 50, 100, 175, 250, or a one-time gift, okay? So there's two kinds of pledge cards, open-ended where they write it in themselves, pledge card with ask amounts where you're suggesting the amounts to them. Our question was, okay, well, which one of those cards works better? And it turns out the answer has a little bit of nuance. The open-ended card works best for one group, and that group is major donors. If you have folks that are giving to your organization of, let's call it 5,000 or more, depending on the size of your organization, maybe it's 10,000 or more, the large donors, they want that open-ended card, which makes sense when we kind of think back from a psychological standpoint. I liken it to that feeling. So the donors want that feeling of writing in the amount, especially when they're large donors and they're making large gifts. I think of it as, sometimes I travel a ton, right? So my lawn is always long. I never get to mow it as much as I want. So sometimes I'll wake up in the morning, I'll see the lawn needs to be mowed, and I'll be like, oh, I'm going to surprise my wife. I'm going to get out there, I'm going to mow it. It's going to look great. And invariably what happens is she says something to me the night before, or that morning's like, hey, you really need to mow the lawn. And she kind of steals that from me, right? I wanted to do it. I wanted to write it in myself and be the benefactor. I'm still going to mow the lawn. I'm still going to make the gift in this case, but it feels different when I'm being asked for it versus when I'm coming up with it and making that gift. I think that's what's going on. Whether there's a different psychological reason, I guess it doesn't matter, because the truth is when you send that card to the major gift donors, it should be open-ended. Do not send a pledge card with an amount on it that's more than $10,000. Even I wouldn't even go that high. I'd say maybe $7,500 at the most, okay? The other card, the card with the ask amount. This card works best with another very specific group of people, which is literally everyone else in your database. If they are not a major donor, you should be sending them a pledge card with an ask amount on it, with a suggested ask amount. You will raise more money. I'm going to repeat this. You will raise more money when you send a pledge card with suggested ask amounts than you will sending a pledge card with an open-ended amount, unless, one exception, if it's a major donor, you want to let them write in the amount. Okay, So that's your first takeaway from today. By the way, if you don't take away 3 or 4 practical things that you can apply immediately to your nonprofit, I have failed you as a speaker. You should never come to anything else that we present at again. You should walk away here with a whole lot of practical stuff. So that's number 1. Send everybody ask amounts, suggested ask amounts. They will do better unless they're a major donor. Okay. Another lesson we learned from this research project. So we're talking about asking amounts, talking about pledge cards. You need to stop asking donors to write their credit card information on their card. Okay. This is what a pledge card looks like. Usually on the back, we have something like this, and we invite them to write their name and write their card number. Many of our clients that hire us on the consulting side have cards like this, and they say, oh, but everybody we have people they're used to writing in their credit card. Stop doing it. Okay. And here's why you should stop doing it. Replace it, use that real estate, send them over to your donation page for your website. If you're using Virtuous, send them over to that beautiful, raised donor page. And what you're going to find is that you will, number 1, you're going to raise more money. Number 2, it makes it much more likely that you can convert them into a recurring gift, depending on how you have donation funnels set up. So you're going to raise more money. You're going to be able to get them over to a recurring gift. It's easy for you to process those gifts. You're going to get an email. You're guaranteed to get an email because when they give online, they're required to put an email. They get the receipt. So suddenly you have a good, accurate email that you don't have to type in. It's easier to process. And it allows you to control that donation experience. Okay. Raise more money, more secure, more likely to make a recurring gift, all of the good things. I know that's not specific on the topic of ask amounts, but you all need to hear it. Okay. Do not send out pledge cards asking for credit card information. Okay. What we learned, you can't ask everybody for the same amount. So let's talk about this. What do we mean by that? Many nonprofits, when outbound fundraising, okay, we talk about Virtuous and their beautiful focus on responsive fundraising. And when people come in, we learn who they are and we're setting the right ask amount at the right time. I'm talking about when we're not pulling, when we're pushing, right? When you're doing your annual appeal, your year-end mailing, your hospital quarterly grateful patient mailing. When you're sending out and inviting your existing donors that you know who they are, you're inviting them to give, you can either ask everybody for the same amount or you can set custom amounts. We ran the experiment for you. We're going to share what we learned. The control group sent out standard amounts to everybody. All donors got this pledge card asking for 100, 150, 250, 500. And then we set personalized amounts for the next group, right? And there were, I think, 17 in the end. Like we put people in like 17 tiers. And in some cases, asked them for less than they would have if we sent them the one-size-fits-all approach. And what we learned sent us down this path, right, that we've been on for the last few years of really focusing on custom ask amounts, because the folks who received the standard amounts, one-size-fits-all, they increased their gift from the year before by, on an average of about 4.5%, which is just about keeping up with inflation. It's what you might expect. The donors who received the personalized ask amounts, averaged a 29% increase in their gift. 29% increase in their gift only by asking them for something that we knew would be appropriate for them. So that's really critical, and we're going to talk about how we do that and how we use wealth research as we get into the meat of this presentation. Okay. Final bit of trivia for you. This is something that's going to be helpful, and we actually have a poll to go along with this. Put your ask strings in the right order. And here's what I mean. We have a pledge card, looks like this. And you zoom in and you've got your ask amounts and they look like that. There's 2 ways you can do it. You can do it with us sending asks, which means low to high, right? From 100 all the way up to 500, or left to right and go high to low. And I'm going to call a favor on my friend Brian, who's I think in the background here. Brian, if we can launch that poll, I'm curious to know what people think. Which one would you use, okay? High to low or low to high? And as he's doing that, I'm looking at the chat, and there's so many questions here that I realize I've already blown through. I'm going to have to come back to all of these when we get through the slides here. All right. I'll give about another 5 seconds here on the poll, low to high or high to low. I am going to, Brian, can you share the results? Is that possible? Let's see if there's wisdom in the crowd here. Here we go. Okay, ascending, there we go. Ascending 35%, descending. Oh my goodness. All right, so the majority of people think descending. I say, oh my goodness, because the majority of people are dead wrong. When you present your ask amounts from low to high, we have found you will receive a 17% higher gift on average. And this is not just us. Tom Ahrens, I think, wrote an entire book on this. He had some great anecdotes in there as well. His suggestion for why this is he uses a term, and it's not microaggression, that's a loaded term, but it's something like that, where it's if you're a donor, let's say you've given $100, and suddenly you get a pledge card and it starts at $500. Your first impression is going to be a negative one, like, holy cow, I can't give 500, I just gave 100, that's weird. And then you're going to go down, and maybe the next one you can't give either. So each one kind of makes you feel bad, versus when you're reading a pledge card like a book, left to right, you've given 100, maybe the first ask is 100 again, or even better, 120. It's something that's doable. You're going to look over to the right and think, oh, can I give a little bit more? Maybe you can. That's his psychological reasoning. Again, when we do research, we don't get that quantitative. We can just tell you what works and what doesn't. And what works is left to right on a printed pledge card, ask amounts going from low to high. Okay. This is a great example. I love it so much that the poll ended that way, because my favorite thing in the world is when our gut is wrong, right? When we can't trust our gut, because in fundraising for so long, it's been, oh my gosh, I've been doing it this way forever. This is how it works. And now we have the data to find out really what does work and what doesn't work, right? We have great tools like Virtuous that we can use to track and catalog and see our KPIs and our metrics. And in this case, the data doesn't lie. Us sending asterisks works better, okay? The other thing to know, you cannot just ask for a 10% increase, okay? So let's talk about what that looks like. So when we did a study, we have a couple slides later, we talk about how do people set ask amounts. Some of them ask everybody the same thing. We just covered it. Don't do that anymore. You have to ask for personalized ask amounts. Many nonprofits say, oh, well, we look to see what they gave last year, and then we're going to ask them to give about 10% more. Here's what that looks like. Okay, number one, somebody gave $20, you're going to ask them to give 22. If they gave $100, you're going to ask them to give 110. 500 is 550, on and on. You see how it is. So this is what a 10% increase gets you. There are about a third of the nonprofits in the US right now that this is the strategy. When someone is given to your appeal, your year-end appeal, your quarterly appeal, your whatever it might be, your next ask is 10% more. Let's look at what we think about that, right? So the $22, way too low for that donor. 110 on a $100 gift previously, way too low. The 550 is probably too low. Asking for $1,100 is just, it's too weird. And the 5,500 is possibly okay. That's how we would assess this. This is us living in this data day in and day out. That's what it looks like, okay? What we would set, again, being paid to do this stuff for a living, I would set a moderate or aggressive ask of 100 to 250 on that first-time donor, okay? On and on down the line here. So the only one that we're matching up on is that $5,000 donor, where I think a 10% is appropriate. For all the others, we are way above 10%, okay? Here's what that looks like as a percentage, if you're curious. So if you're just setting an ask amount, a bump of 10%, you're not even in the ballpark for the vast majority of your potential donors, which should lead to this natural conclusion that you might have, which is most organizations we find are asking for way too little rather than too much. And this is counterintuitive. Again, as fundraisers, or maybe if you volunteered in an organization, or if you've been interacting with board members, it feels like our entire life is defined by, oh, we're asking for too much. We can't ask for this. We can't ask for this. That may be true in individual circumstances, especially if we're talking about major gift stuff. For the vast majority, the 95% of what we do as fundraisers, we are asking for too little. Okay, we are asking for too little versus too much. Again, just to go back to that slide for a minute, there's only one spot on here where we're asking for a 10% bump. Everything else would be asked for much more than 10%, which is much higher than what most nonprofits are doing. All right, let's talk about wealth research again. So today we're talking about the Goldilocks zone. How do we set the perfect ask amount that's not too high and not too low? Wealth research is one of the first things you're going to think of. Donor Search has a product, iWave. Wealth Engine, if they're still around, is out there. If you're on Blackbaud, there's Target Analytics and Research Point. What is helpful, I think, to know is that wealth research is useful, absolutely useful in context, right? And I'm going to look at two elements here. So I'll back up. Usually with wealth research, you get two things. You get estimated assets, which is really just a LexisNexis search to find out how much total assets the person has, heavily influenced by real estate holdings. And then if they're publicly a C-level or above at a public traded company, you can get that information. Some other little, things here or there, but largely it's them coming up with a total dollar figure for that person. And then generally, again, all the different systems have different quirks. Then generally they're telling you what you can ask that person for. They're trying to estimate what their next ask might be based only on wealth research. Okay. Here's how we would use wealth research. So if your question is, I'm at a large nonprofit or a medium nonprofit, we've been sold, wealth research, and I'm struggling with how do I use that? Do I just take those suggested ask amounts and ask for it? Do I not? Here's what we do. Okay. We know from our work that there are basically 6 kinds of donors to any of our appeals. When we're running large, multi-channel appeals for our clients, we got Steady Eddie, First Gift Fran, Campaign Kathy, Checkbox Charlie, Infrequent Earl, Hidden Gem Helen. Those are the 6 people we have in mind when we're setting ask amounts, when we're analyzing the data. And I've done entire webinars on this. If people are curious, I can put it out there on how we get to those people and how you address them. But I want to show just a couple of them and how it matters related to wealth research. And I want to focus first on the guy that we call Infrequent Earl. Okay, this is Earl's giving history from 2019 through 2024. Made a big gift in 2019, $4,000. Then he skipped a year. Then he gave $6,500, and he skipped a couple of years. Typically, Infrequent Earl is a business owner, not a glamorous business, right? Maybe like an auto dealership or a shop or something, machine welding, something. He's way more wealthy than you would think. He's a blue collar guy, but he's the busiest guy in the world, right? And he will give to you generously when he is in the moment and you're there and you catch him at the right time. And then he's not going to give to you because he's just busy. Okay. And then he might give to you again. So it's not that he doesn't like you. That is who Infrequent Earl is. Let's say wealth research we're using says that Earl has a capacity to make $1,000 gift. What you should do is ask him for $6,000. Okay. So it's marrying the wealth research and his giving history. If I'm looking at this and he's given $4,000 in the past and $6,500, but it's been a couple of years, I'm asking him for $6,000. Even if wealth research didn't exist, I would be asking Earl probably for about $6,000. Okay. So in this case, you can't just go with what wealth research says. You would be massively under asking Earl. Okay. So you're doing it based on giving history. But let's look at a different example. Okay. Let's look at First Gift Fran. She just made her first gift to your organization last year, and it was $20. Okay. Now the question is, what do we ask Fran for? We already know because we covered it in this presentation. We're not going to ask her for a 10% bump because asking for someone for $22 is ridiculous. Okay. So what are we going to ask her for? She dipped her toe in with that $20 gift. Let's say wealth research says she has a capacity to make a $5,000 gift. The way to think of this is less about the $5,000 number and more of you should see a green light when you see that. It's more of a yes, no. It's an indicator that yes, there is some wealth potential there based on real estate holdings or based on previous giving, depending on how good your wealth research firm is. She has a capacity to make a $5,000 gift. What I would ask for is $400. Okay. I would not ask for that $5,000. That is too big of a jump. If all she's given is a $20 gift, that's it. We know that it's not $20 because it's the widow's mite, and that's the most I can possibly give you. We know that not to be true based on wealth research. So now we know what it is. It's a token gift. It's an entry-level gift. It's a, hey, I've never heard of you before. I just heard of you, but here's the thing. Let's see how you thank me and see how it feels. My friend said you're a good organization, whatever it might be. Now you ask her for something appropriate, which is a meaningful gift, which at this point with Fran is $400. Okay. What if wealth research says she has the capacity to make a $10 million gift? Okay. We should be so lucky, but you will have folks like this in your database. So wealth research says, hey, so let's say you're using Virtuous, you're connected to donor search, and it says this person has capacity to make a $10 million gift. You're doing backflips. You're saying, great, I'm going to send the mailing out. Do you ask for $10 million? No. You ask for $1,000. That is all that you can realistically move it up on that direct mail. Okay. Hopefully that makes sense. Yes, what you should be doing is scheduling a personal visit and all the things that we're not covering in the topic here today. But as it relates to actually sending mailings out the door, the most you can ask somebody who's never given and is just given $20 that I would do is $1,000. You could argue, say maybe we want to do $2,500. That's fine. But the point is, wealth research is helpful when used in context with someone's giving history, right? Which is what we have up here on the screen. Okay. The fact of the matter is this is kind of hard to do because now think of what we're talking about. You've got wealth research in one vector over here. Then you've got your database, which is full of all of this wonderful data that you spent time putting in there, right? You've got last year's appeal gift, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, capital campaign gift, special event, zip code. These happen to be actually the most critical elements of setting ask amounts. We look at every one of these when we are setting ask amounts. And we used to do it in a way that was really difficult. We would just export an Excel spreadsheet and do it all by hand. And then we came up with this tool called Ask Genius, which I'll explain what that is. But that's what you should be doing. You should be looking at all of that data and then setting ask amounts. Again, to reiterate how most nonprofits set their ask amounts, they go like this. Send everybody the same pledge cards, about a third. High, medium, or low pledge cards is another third. Asking for that 10% bump is the other third. The problem with these approaches, okay, is that they offend me as they offend me as a fundraiser, but they offend me as a data entry person. I live inside of fundraising databases, and I know how hard it is to get all that information in there and keep it clean and keep it organized so that when Nick and Holly make a gift, somebody could pull up my record and see exactly what the gift is. When you're sending everybody the same pledge card, you're not using any of that data, which should really anger you. If you're on the data side of the house and not a frontline fundraiser, you should be very upset that you're putting all this time and energy in there, and then none of that data is actually being used to set ask amounts, okay? If you're going the route of doing high, medium, or low, that's pretty good. It's probably the best option out there. If you're not setting custom amounts for everybody, that's good. Maybe you're looking at 2 data points, appeal gift last year, largest gift, that's fine. If you're just asking for 10% more than last year, again, you're going backwards. You're only looking at person's gift last year. And think about Infrequent Earl. Infrequent Earl gave $0 last year, so you would be asking him for nothing. You really must look at every single data point in order to set the right ask amounts. Again, these are for people that you know. This is not for when we're inviting people in, when you have a public fundraising page and people are just showing up maybe to a fun run to donate for a friend. You don't know any history about them. You just want the best looking donation page possible. That's great. I'm talking about when you have thousands of people in your database and you're going out to them and inviting them to make a gift. So one way to do it, you can get a spreadsheet. You can put all the information you need on there. You can go through it line by line, and it will work. Go through it line by line, set the ask amounts based on last year's gift, previous year's gift, use wealth research as an indicator and a green light. We did this for a long time, and we hated it because it took days and days and days. The problem is it worked really well. Our clients were raising millions of dollars more than before, but me and my team were pouring over spreadsheets, 80, 100,000 rows, setting ask amounts. So we actually took the work off your plate. We thought there's got to be a better way. And we invented this tool called Ask Genius. Yeah, and that's many of you use it. I see some familiar names actually here in the chat. The way Ask Genius works is it does all of that math that we just talked about. Okay, it's a big complicated machine that we built. It looks like this. And it takes the donor's largest gift and it puts it into the grinder. And then it takes zip code, okay? On and on. It takes wealth research, puts those in there, and it's doing all the math that we used to do in Excel, and it's giving you the ability to set the perfect ask amount for every single donor. So we do it by hand, and it's perfectly public. Like the reason I'm leading the session is not to tell you to use Ask Genius. If you're good at Excel, you don't need Ask Genius, or if you have a bunch of time, you don't. But what it will spit out for you then are the pledge cards, right? The ask amounts that go on your pledge cards all come out and they look like this. Okay, you've got that little checkbox there, 750, 900, 1200, whatever it is appropriate for that particular donor. That's what Ask Genius will produce for you, and it has this ability that you can decide whether you want to be aggressive with your ask amounts or you can be conservative. It's entirely up to you. You can say I want to focus on major gifts, or I'm going to focus on lifting people up to the next giving circle that we have. There's all sorts of fun stuff. You can play with the dials. But until Ask Genius existed, there was no way to do this, right? We knew that asking for personalized ask amounts was the way to go. We knew because data shows us that. The science shows us you will raise more money with personalized ask amounts. There was just never an easy way to set those at scale. And God bless Virtuous for coming along and focusing on responsive fundraising and listening to each individual donor and not treating everybody with this one-size-fits-all approach. So we've been lockstep with them from the beginning because they see it. They know that it matters, right? Virtuous knows it matters. Every donor is different. Let's treat them like the individual that they are. In terms of whether it works, it does. I'll give you an example here. Diocese of Trenton, one of the first people to use it. This is what their appeal looked like when they started asking for personalized ask amounts, right? The value of their increased gift. Every year they got people to increase their gift, but when they started using it, they increase it to the tune of $300,000. Okay, this should matter to you. If there's $300,000 sitting on the table for you, you should go grab it. Okay. There's a whole bunch of other organizations that have jumped in and kind of spearheaded this. Again, our work is largely in Catholic dioceses, which is why you see so many on there. But the truth is, what you should take away from this slide is setting personalized ask amounts works, right? Whether you use a tool like Ask Genius, whether there's other tools out there, you should be focusing on sending your donors invitations to give that are appropriate for them as an individual. Okay, that's what we're talking about today. In terms of how this works with Virtuous, I'm very proud to share we've got this great partnership with Virtuous. Basically, what it means we did was we took our machine that we painstakingly, lovingly built, and that where we used to just plug in all of that data on our own to get the ask amounts, we just built a giant pipe, right? From Virtuous headquarters there in Phoenix, all the way over to our machine, which is here in Omaha, and that will generate everything you need. So you take all that great data, comes out of Virtuous. Sorry, I'm moving the slides too fast here. All that great data comes out. And what makes us excited is that Virtuous has even more data that's useful. You can look at email open rate. You can look at website visits, all the stuff that you can get out of the responsive fundraising platform. You can feed into the Ask Genius grinder, and you can then go off, set your ask amounts. Life is good. Okay. I have a couple bits of final strategic advice. This is if you wanted to learn more about that partnership. A couple bits of final strategic advice, but first I want to scan the chat here to see if there are some questions I want to apply. Let's see. Do we partner with Kindful Bloomerang? We do not. But you can use Ask Genius with any CRM. If there's not Razor's Edge or Virtuous, which have direct connections, you can just upload an Excel file. Danielle says you still don't know the donor. Asking too high makes the donor think you treat them as an ATM. Yes, that's right, Danielle. You got to be careful. However, the counterpoint is when someone gives that $20 gift, most of the time fundraisers are mistaking that for that's all they can give. That is not the case. That $20 gift is not a this is all I can give unless the person is 80 years old. That $20 gift is, hey, I'm interested. Let's start this conversation. Okay. How can you determine what other philanthropic gifts they give and likely divide amongst? From Catherine. Great question, Catherine. Wealth research will tell you it's getting better and better. In the old days, wealth research used to be, hey, here's what is really a house value thing. Hey, here's what their house value is. And if they work for a really large enough company and have stocks that are publicly available information, we'll give you that too. Then about 5 years ago, they started getting better. They started scraping the internet. Might have been 7 or 8 years ago. They started scraping the internet for annual reports and tying that to a donor's name. So then they gave you not just real estate information, but real estate information and their giving history. Because they can say, oh, Creighton University published this report. Dick and Holly gave $2,000. So they have a verified gift of $2,000. And they started being able to bundle all that together. And that's when it really started getting useful, right? Because the number one thing, and we don't even have a slide to talk about it here today, the number one thing in fundraising, if you're looking to find out what do we ask for and what do we learn, a giver is a giver, right? If someone has given before, they are likely to give again. Okay? If someone has given before, they're likely to give again. If they haven't given before, if they're not a giver, you've got a tough road ahead of you. So use wealth research to be able to tell what they've been giving to. It's a start. It's not 100%. Looking to see if there's any other questions here in the chat. Okay. All right, so I'm going to go through a couple of final pieces of advice, and I'm going to come back to, I see we got some good ones here in the Q&A that I'll get to. All right, final strategic advice. This is me throwing in something that we get asked about all the time, so I want to share the best advice that's out there, okay? We've been talking about outbound fundraising, okay? Not inviting people who've never heard of us to stumble on our website and make a gift. I'm talking, I know who you are, you went to my high school, that's why you're on this list, or you've supported us in the past, or whatever it might be. Should you list the donor's previous gift amount in the letter or the pledge card? And the answer is a very lawyerly, it depends, okay? But here's what it depends on. I'm going to give you good advice. It's helpful if you want to anchor that donor to the same gift, okay? If they gave $1,000 and you'd be tickled and that's all you want to have happen, yes, do that. But it's dangerous if your data isn't accurate, okay? So this is when soft credits and spouses giving, you can get into a lot of trouble. People should be nodding their heads right now because we've all been burned by this, right? We really segment our data and we send out a letter and we say to somebody, hey, you know we missed your gift last year. We'd love it if you give this year. And it turns out that the person's spouse made the gift last year. Now we just prove that we don't know who they are, taking a big step back. So it's dangerous, okay? But the reason I don't do it is because we found it makes asking for an increase very conspicuous. Your best case scenario is that you're writing a wonderful fundraising letter, you're telling a story, you're showing the donor you know who they are. There's a magic, that's spell that's being cast by your letter. But then you break it when you ask for that specific amount in the letter, right? Because it breaks that spell. You don't want to break the spell. Don't do that. Let the ask strings do the lifting for you. So if I give $1,000, I want my organization to send me a letter. Tell me how incredible I am. Tell me, because it's all about me, the donor. That's what your letter should be. It's not about the nonprofit. It's about the donor. Here's why you're an amazing donor. Here's how your gift is making a difference. Here's how you're standing up and really, making an impact in the community or whatever it might be. Thank you so much for your gift. And then there's an ask amount that's appropriate in the form of the pledge card. Okay. I'm not then focused on, oh, they asked me for $200 more or $400 more. I'm just focused on, yeah, that's a reasonable amount and I'm going to make that gift. Okay. The one exception is here. Okay. If your ask is meaningful instead of algorithmic, and I'll explain what I mean by that, then you should ask for it in the letter. And here's an example. Please feed a child for $20 a week. That's what I mean by a meaningful ask, not an algorithmic driven by numbers ask, but hey, $20 a week feeds a child. Please join this giving society at $100. That's also when you should put it in the letter. Okay. So that is some strategic advice. I wanted to share that because anytime we talk about ask amounts, we end up getting asked about when do we include that? Do we include it in the letter? Do we not? Okay. So now let's dive into Q&A. I've done a good job and left us a little bit of time here. All right. Question from Gene O'Keefe for a first-time Fran. How much time between the $20 gift and the $400 ask? Tons of research on this. So the best research I've seen, there's a 90-day window when you're most likely to get another gift. And if you get another gift in that 90-day window, the lifetime value of that donor skyrockets. Okay. So if you're running a nonprofit that believes in responsive fundraising, you should be following up within a month, right? It should not be the very next touch. Your next touch when she makes that first gift, if you're doing a good job, should be, hey, I think you just made your first gift to our organization, Fran. That's fantastic. I just want to introduce myself. My name's Nick. I work here. I have this great job of getting to work with donors and help them make an impact. I just want you to know I see you. You're incredible. If you have any questions, call me up, right? Then maybe another touch point if you're building a welcome series. Virtuous is great at this, by the way. Build a little welcome series, an email series. It gives them a fun piece of data or shows them some big outcome. It shows them a great photo. Then you can come back and ask them, hey, Fran, by the way, we have this thing going on. Would you consider a gift of $400 to do X, Y, Z? Or would you join our 1,000 people that have made a gift of $400 to do ABC, whatever it might be? But you want to get that in within the first 3 months. Most organizations are not built that way. I want to be very clear, right? There's a gulf between, the philosophy of responsive fundraising, which is everybody comes in and we treat them all individually because the tools never existed in the past to do that. But there's a gulf between that and the way most nonprofits are run, which is not responsive to every donor and lots of asks throughout the year, but more of we run a nonprofit, we run a spring appeal, we run a fall appeal, we have a year-end appeal, and every 5 or 6 years we do a capital campaign. Okay, that's the way that most nonprofits operate. So many organizations trying to bridge the gap. Don't be afraid to follow up with them within the first 3 months is key. Question Mark says, is Ask Genius powered by AI? It is not, and I would be very hesitant to connect anything AI to your database. In fact, not only would I be hesitant, I would tell you don't do that. Okay, so don't do that. In terms of the letter writing and all the fundraising stuff that we do, that's generative. AI is great. I use ChatGPT all the time. It's better than starting with a blank slate. But we are not powering anything by AI. We are powering it by the data points that matter the most, which we found to be the donor's last gift, what they gave before that last gift, their third to last gift, what zip code they're in, what else is in there, whether they made a capital campaign gift, all the other stuff that's in there. That's more important. It is not powered by AI. Danielle asks, how do you do this with donor prospects who haven't given before? If they haven't given before, you're looking at two things. Looking at zip code and you're looking at wealth research. Okay, so if I have 80,000 people in my database, 20,000 of them have never given before, maybe they just showed up because they came to an event or they're an alumni or something like that. Throw out all the giving history out the window and I'm looking at what is the average gift in their zip code and I'm going to set their ask amount based on that. And then I'm going to look at wealth research. And based on wealth research, I'm either going to bump up the ask a little bit or I'm going to keep it the same. And that's all that I would use it for. I will not use wealth research to say, oh, they told me this person can give 5,000. I'm going to ask them for that, because it's wildly inappropriate for first-time gift. Okay. Marissa says, how do you manage this level of specificity with a really large database? We couldn't anymore. We used to be doing it all through Excel, and we couldn't. So then we invented Ask Genius to do it for us, right? So that's how we handle that level of specificity within the ask amount. If Marissa, if you're asking about the communication side of it, it's all in tags, right? And how you segment your database. You should have it be set up so you're auto tagging any new donors that come in, right? Or anytime you're about to send some communication out, the way in which you pull the data out of your CRM, you need to pull it out in a way that lets you segment for first-time donors, second donors, who we've categorized as Steady Eddie, the people that we've categorized as infrequent Earl. We're setting those tags, and then to get a little bit more in the weeds, we're just drafting one letter. We're not drafting multiple letters to all these people. We're drafting one really great letter, and then there's about one graph in that letter that changes based on the segment that we've assigned. I have also done webinars entirely on that. If you Google, I think, Ask Genius World's Greatest Fundraising Letter, it's a whole webinar that goes into the details on how you manage that side of thing. Question from Gene. Cost of mailing skyrockets with segmentation and smaller lists. It shouldn't, right? So your mailing should cost the same. To mail something should cost the same no matter what. You're only segmenting and swapping out individual paragraphs within that letter. Tips. I'm going to break your heart here, I think. PSG is a digital fundraising firm. We are all in on all the tech that you can do. Fundraising is still a direct mail business. It just is, right? 80% of people want to receive that hard copy letter. And even the ones who say they don't receive it, they still perform better when they do receive it. Now, many of them will go and give online, but this is my way of telling you that email appeals don't work, right? Period, full stop. You cannot launch an email campaign and expect it to perform in any way, shape, or form, right? If somebody's maybe a long-time giver and they're used to giving online, an email appeal might work. Your appeals have to be anchored by direct mail. I'm longing for the day when that's not true, but that is just the world we're living in right now. People need to receive that. There's something about it, receiving that printed piece in the mail, inviting them to give. Of course, you should then have an email series that follows up with them, right? And it's segmented and it reaches them and it gives them the abilities to click and donate online. But we've tracked this. Everybody tracks this. If they're not receiving that direct mail piece, they're not going to give, okay? Harley asked, when referring to the open-ended pledge cards for major donors, what was considered to be major? For us, it was $10,000 and above. I realize for many nonprofits that are smaller, you don't have any donors at that level, so you can bring it down to 5,000 or so. But really, at 5,000 or below, you can be sending them a pledge card with specific ask amounts. Okay, Maya asks, what do you suggest for a database of donors, both long time and within the last 5 years, that have been chronically under-asked by the org? I recommend stop under-asking them. So I would immediately take a hard look at this. So run your list through Ask Genius or follow any of the free webinars we've given talking about how to set ask amounts, specifically, and start asking for the right amount. You'll be blown away. I mean, it is not uncommon for an organization to double what they're bringing in every year by changing nothing other than asking people more aggressively. And even the word aggressively is going to turn you off. You're going to think, oh, I don't want to be aggressive to donors. You need to be more aggressive than what you're being, because you're under asking by a large margin. Okay, that is way more common than people that are over asking. Okay, question from Andrea here. And again, if you have more questions, make sure to get them in here. I'm doing my best to get them all out there. How do you recommend asking for an annual increase for monthly recurring donors? Number one thing, you do not want to send people a letter that has them thinking, shaking their head saying, they don't know who I am, right? So the letter that you send, that monthly recurring donor it absolutely has to start with, Nick and Holly, thank you so much for being a recurring donor to XYZ organization. Like, we value that so much. That's how you have to start. So they know, okay, I'm in the right bucket, because they're just primed and ready to be like, don't you know I'm already giving you, I've given all this stuff. So don't send them a generic, one size fits all letter. Thank you for being an incredible donor. And then invite them and say, if you've been blessed this year and you'd like to consider increasing your recurring gift, please do so in this way, right? Here's a link where you can do that.